So let's start with the brief introduction to data visualization for scientists. Just a quick word. So scientific visualizations are obviously nothing new that we are facing right now in the scientific world. But in fact, visualizations have been around since around 2000 years, mostly as text and image data. So one example we can see here. This is one of the oldest scientific images that we have a record of. It's a transcript from 500 AD, but it was made much more early than that, and it shows a plant, but it's a stereotype plant. So this is not a beautification of a living organism, but it's a plant that is used in medicine and has pharmaceutical purposes and was documented in order for other people to also make the same medicinal compounds. So that the purpose of this drawing is a scientific one. Here we see another example, also from a medical textbook that was first made 200 years after Anno Domini. And what we see here is the different types of scorpions. And some of them are poisonous and others aren't. Very, very important information for maybe a medical doctor that needs to treat a patient that was bitten. What you can see already here in this image data is that it's very organized. So the scientific information isn't just plastered somewhere on the page, but all the animals are aligned with each other in rows, and all the heads are facing left and the tails are facing the right. And pretty much this is still how zoological information, image data, is still presented today. So since around 2000 years, we have text and image data in the scientific world, but we also, for a similarly long time, have diagrams that are communicating scientific information. One that is shown here is from Aristotle, so way before Christ was born. And what you can see these little triangles, upside and downside triangles, and they actually are not just letters, but they are explaining something. They explain in 4 diagrams the position of the legs in animals and the possibilities that exist. So actually what Aristotle didn't draw is the body of the animal. He just drew the legs and how they can be bent. And how do we know that this is a diagram? Because he refers in his text to the diagrams shown on the side. So diagrams have a really long history in science as well. The charts, so numerical information, has a much shorter history in scientific visualization. Around 200 years ago, charts first became widespread with two people that were very important here were William Playfair and Florence Nightingale, both working in England, and both deciding that numerical information needs to be put into a visualization in order to be understandable. Florence Nightingale was working on charts for medical data, and William Playfair was working on charts for economical data. In the database world, however, there's one visualization that is considered the very first line chart, and it shows the planetary movements. We do not know who designed it, but it's very nicely capturing the different relative movements of the planets. So on the left-hand side, you can see the different planets, and their names are written above: Venus, Earth, etc. And then you can also see the moon, and the person tracked basically how high these planets were visible from whatever, his window or something, from where he observed them on the sky. So this is considered the first line chart, although it's debatable whether it can be considered a chart. Today, of course, we have an absolute explosion of data and visualization possibilities. So we all know that the text-based databases today, mainly Google, etc., are huge. So there's numerous possibilities for text-based searches, text-based analysis of data. Um, at the same time, we do no longer have drawings, but we have multidimensional images in movies, and especially in biology, there has been massive advances. So, for example, we can watch the heartbeat in real life in developing organisms, and we can watch from different cells forming in the organisms throughout the entire developmental time. So images have become very, very large, very multidimensional, and hard to handle. At the same time, this obviously also happened to the charts. So in the past 50 years alone, we have seen a huge avalanche of new chart types for presenting larger and larger data sets. And you can see some of them summarized in visual vocabularies such as this, where you can sort these numerous chart types by their purpose or by the variants that they're encoding. And we're trying to discuss a couple of those and their specific uses in science in the course today. Visualizations are helpful, which is why we are using them so much. So they are helpful to explain data to our peers. So figures are estimated to take up to 70% of the space in publications today. So the majority of space is devoted to visualizations. Why? A couple of reasons. Obviously, they are very efficient. So in order to condense a lot of data, a figure usually requires less space than describing the same amount with words. They are also fast and intuitive. So as humans, we have a pre-attentive visual perception. So we cannot not see everything that is displayed to us. We sort of take in not voluntarily, and we just start processing it before we can even think about it. And visualizations are also often logic, so we can we can very rapidly learn very advanced visual languages. For example, our alphabet is very, very advanced and complicated, actually. But we can learn it quite rapidly, and the same we can do for chart types and different visualizations that are helpful in a scientific context. Let's look at a few examples. So as I said, visualizations are very, very concise, and what you can see here is a map of the world, and something is highlighted on top of it. The light blue sparks are indicating where people were sending tweets out last night. And if you briefly think about how long this would actually take to describe these pictures in words, it would probably become a small book in order to really describe the contours of all the countries and the place of all the little blue dots where a tweet was sent. So typically visualizations require a lot less space than text. And also what makes them concise and fast is that in this case, standard display types have been learned. And in this case, the display type that we are all familiar with since school is a map of the world. So we can probably pinpoint very, very quickly our own home. So we can probably see roughly where is Dresden or Germany or wherever you grew up in. We can probably all see at the first glance where's Australia. We know it's this big continent at the lower right side, etc. So we have seen it numerous times, which makes it very fast for us to get out specific information from it. So visual perception is also intuitive, I said. And we're gonna do one quick exercise. So please, everyone, watch the screen right now, because I'm gonna demonstrate how amazingly fast your visual system is. So you're gonna see a brief slide, and it would be great if you could take a little pen and maybe a little bit of piece of paper right now, so that you can write down for yourself a quick note. Okay. I hope everyone's ready, because now it's fast. So what do you remember? You're going to see something for a really, really short time span, and I'm going to ask you to write down what it is. Okay. I'm going to do this once more. What do you remember? 3, 2, 1. Okay. So take a minute to write something down. And then I'm going to say what I think you probably wrote down. So the very first thing you probably all noticed was that these were alphabetical Latin letters. So some words, some letters were written down on a slide. So you recognized in a fraction of a second, without thinking about it, alphabet letters. You also might have realized or written down that there were 3 letters in 3 rows. So a layout of 3 by 3, which means you also pre-attentively perceived the layout of the visualization. You probably wrote down the content of the letters, and maybe you recognized that the first one was a K, followed by a Z, followed by an R in the first line. And maybe some of you also had time to read the second line, which contained the letters Q, B, and T. And probably no one of you wrote down anything about the third line, which contained the letters S, G, and N. So in a fraction of a second, your visual system was able to detect and identify a couple of these letters probably. And what you probably didn't pay attention to but saw nonetheless was that it was a dark blue background and the letters were in light. So you also perceived something about the colors, which means your visual system is able to detect the display type, understand the content of it, perceive the layout of it, and see the colors used. And most importantly, you probably all, the chances are very high that most of you remember the letter K, which was the first in the upper leftmost corner, and probably no one remembered the last line, which tells you something about how we screen, how our eyes are screening visualizations. They start at the upper leftmost corner, where we also start reading text, and they go down line by line until they end at the lower right-hand corner. So every time we see a visualization, our eyes intuitively start trying to understand them at the upper leftmost corner, which is why we put, for example, titles there. And remember, all of this happened before you were even thinking of it. So this was 0.3 seconds, the time span that isn't enough to process it really. So visualization perception is intuitive, and what our eyes does, if it doesn't see letters, for example, is that it screens visualizations such as this one here for patterns. And our human brains is designed to find not only patterns and to recognize them, but also find aberrations very, very rapidly from them. So if you look for just a fraction of a second, you can probably see that there's actually a little blue square inside all the black ones. The next important thing is that visual perception is intuitive and really, really fast, but it's extremely hard to override it. So whatever we see first, we believe is true. If I show you now on the next slide something, I'm going to give you an instruction. So I want you to look in the lower right corner. Now I'm showing you an arrow, and probably most of you started to look in the lower left corner instead of the lower right corner. So the arrow pointing towards a corner has much more power than the text telling you to look in the lower right corner. Okay. Similar here. If I am going to show you a slide or a visualization and tell you in this visualization the corona cases in Dresden are rising, and then the visualization comes and it shows a downward arrow, then your brain will have a hard time remembering that the cases were really rising. But what it actually remembers is the downward arrow, which indicates something that it's actually decreasing. So perception is intuitive, it's very efficient and fast, but it's hard to override. So you have to put in a lot of work to counter the effect of visualizations. Visualizations are also used. So we discussed now that we use a lot of visualizations to explain data to our peers in terms of lab meetings or papers or etc. But we are also using visualizations increasingly to explore our very own data. Why is it important? Data is becoming more and more. So it's harder and harder to really look through an Excel list or look through larger data sets. So it's faster for us to make visualizations of our own data to understand it. It's also important to explore our own data visually because of the two following scenarios. Maybe some of you have heard about the Anscombe quartet. So summary statistics, for example, do not say everything. Here we have Anscombe developed 4 data set. And visually, you can see that they are totally different from each other. In one, the data points are following a line. In one, the data points are accumulated in one spot, and we have an outlier somewhere else. In one data set, the data is somewhat scattered, but roughly around a line. And he designed these data sets in such a way that they have the exact same summary statistics. So if you would have these 4 data sets and all you would see is the mean and standard deviation, you would assume they all have the same pattern. However, plotting the actual data helps you to see that the distributions are really rather different from each other. This has been taken recently to the next level. There was a paper which I took, or I write down. I'll put it in your download box in a minute. I forgot. There was a paper where they designed data sets that all look extremely different visually, but that have still the same summary statistics. So the take-home message from this is that if you have larger and larger data sets, you need to also visually explore them for yourself, not just make visualizations to explain them. So how do we start the data visualization process in order to end up with having readable and understandable visualizations? So we have to think about the data visualization process as a cycle or that goes from the encoder. So that's you, the scientist, who's collecting the data and deciding what part of the data to show. And the target is usually some kind of audience. And when you're exploring the data, the audience is yourself. When you're explaining the data, the audience is maybe your thesis supervisor, your colleagues, or the whole world, in case you are working on something like Corona that currently is receiving a lot of attention. But the path from encoder to audience is obviously not straight, but requires many little steps. So the very first part is that you need to identify the object to be measured. This is usually part of your science, right? You decide on what you want to be working on in your project and how to collect the data in order to make any kind of assumptions. So that the next step is, after the data collection and analysis, is that you choose the visual format. And this is where often the process ends. So you just choose a format that is typically used in visualizations from maybe your colleagues, and you just hope that it's understandable. However, take into account that there are 3 more steps. So the audience has to decode the visualization, and for that it needs to understand the visual code used. So you have to start thinking about whether that's possible in the audience that you are targeting with your visualization. Once the audience is able to decode the visual code, it hopefully then reaches a step to interpret the data. So this is the next step after decoding, because now you're trying to make sense of the data and try to understand the main message. And then if this works really, really well, the audience gains insight, which means it has a lasting memory of your visualization and your message. And if you want to improve visualizations in order to make them accessible to an audience, you have to do a lot of thinking and planning of the visualization. I would recommend that this is done with pen and paper as much as possible. Then you have to learn, and we also cover this in the course, the different kind of visualization types. As I said, there are numerous types of visualizations these days, but you have to know which one is suitable for what kind of data. Then you have to test whether the visualization works, and hopefully you do not mislead in this process. And then you get a functional visualization where you encode the data, and exactly what you want the audience to be able to decode is decoded by them. As you go through the data visualization, we're going to learn a couple of shortcuts that make this a lot faster for you to reach that. So I designed, or I compiled the course into really a figure checklist. So this is all that you will basically cover in this. So in order to, every visualization that you see and that you make, you should test. And there are 2 ways how you can do this quickly, and we're going to start the first exercise by doing that. So how to test if a visualization works, there are 2 possibilities. The first is the 1-second test. So you show your visualization to someone for just a second, and you ask, is the key information visible at the first glance? Meaning, is the information that you want them to take out really, really visible at the first glance? Because then you use the power of the intuitive, pre-attentive visual perception. The second way, if the key information is standing out already, then you can ask your colleague or someone to reverse story the figure. That means you ask them to explain it back to you. And if that's possible, it means that they can understand the visualization by itself without you having to give them any kind of indication. And by carefully listening, you figure out very quickly where they get stuck. And this is an indication to you where you maybe missed out information. Okay. Steve is posting something, not for me, not a question. So the quick test of whether a figure works, obviously you should do with every figure that you design, but you can also use it to learn visualizations that you find in the literature. So once you know it's working, you can then also go into more details into what part of the visualization is working. So you should each time check if a suitable chart type was chosen. So is the chart type that is used, for example, actually useful for that kind of data? Is the text sufficient and informative, or is this too much text or too little, too many abbreviations? The third part is whether the colors are helpful and accessible. And the last part is if the layout really helps to orient the audience. If you remember the exercise that we did with the letters KZRQBT, you remember that this is all these aspects where parts of what your visual system can already decode in less than a second time. So these are really important for you to pay attention to. So it's a bit hard sometimes. So we will do this with your own figures on day 3. But to train you to really get into the rhythm of always testing visualizations and finding out where problems are, I designed the very first exercise. So the very first exercise is done on HackMD. So I'm asking you to complete this in this shared document. So what you will do is in a paper or website or tweets or wherever you want, where you go back to a paper you read and look at the figures. Try to not pay attention to the text. And then in this paper, try the 1-second test and the reverse storyboard on the figure of your choice. And then see if that's a functional one where the key information is standing out and you can understand the figure by itself, meaning the figure is self-explanatory. And then I want you to describe with a couple of sentences what you see first, etc., in the text. And I want you to do this and identify a figure that works really well. So that's a great example, and a figure that is maybe improvable. So, and the goal of this exercise is that you are starting to pay attention to how visualizations are done and what works and what makes a good visualization good and what makes a crappy visualization really horrible. So in the HackMD document, you already find examples from me. So there's an example of horror that I put there, which is has a lot of problems, but one of them being, for example, that it's hard to focus on the data. You can see that each column has its own color, and I don't see a color code really stringently used. And in addition, you can see a lot of distracting images in the background. And in the text in the HackMD document, I also explain a little bit more detail of why I think this is a poor visualization. And then I also included one example of something that I, at first glance, I considered a good visualization, which has a clear layout, doesn't have too many colors, has text that is readable at the first glance, and doesn't contain too many abbreviations, etc. So that is what you will be starting with. So for those who just came late, hello. I have recorded this, and you can, in half an hour or so, the video is processed, and you can watch it on YouTube. But I can also upload the slides to the links in the HackMD document. Basically, hello, Lucas. what we discussed is the outline of the course and how we're gonna go through the different exercises. So that is everything that I wanted to say for today. If we now all go to the HackMD document, you will be able to see the exercises and the outline of the